I can't believe you sold our family estate to your secretary for $1, I said, watching as Jim loaded his golf clubs into her Tesla. Legally, it's hers now, he sneered with smug satisfaction. I sipped my wine slowly, hiding a smile behind the crystal glass. He'd forgotten the prenup clause about infidelity forfeitures and that his precious secretary was actually my divorce attorney's niece. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun casts long shadows across the circular driveway of the colonial mansion that has been in Jim's family for generations. The grand estate, with its white columns and meticulous gardens, stands as a monument to old money and privilege, a home that has been both sanctuary and prison for Lois over the 15 years of their marriage. Lois stands on the front steps, barefoot despite the cool morning air, watching her husband load his expensive golf clubs into the trunk of a sleek electric vehicle. Her posture is deceptively casual, one hand holding a half-full glass of Cabernet despite the early hour. She wears simple linen pants and a loose blouse, comfortable clothes that contrast sharply with the polished appearance of the younger woman standing by the driver's side door. Kelly Morgan, Jim's secretary of 8 months, dangles the car keys between manicured fingers, her expression a carefully constructed mask of professional detachment barely concealing triumph. Her tailored dress hugs her figure precisely, diamond studs catching the light as she tosses her blonde hair. I can't believe you sold our family estate to your secretary for $1, Lois says, her voice carrying across the driveway with surprising steadiness. The home we renovated together. The gardens I've tended for 15 years. Jim doesn't bother turning around at first, methodically arranging his prized Callaway clubs in the Tesla's trunk. His shoulders stiffen slightly at her words. The only indication he's heard her at all. When he finally turns, his handsome face is set in lines of practiced condescension, the expression he's perfected for clients who dare question his investment strategies. Legally, it's hers now, he sneers, straightening his designer golf shirt. The transfer is complete. The paperwork is filed. He closes the trunk with unnecessary force, the sound echoing against the brick facade of the estate. You should be grateful I've arranged for you to have the guest house for 30 days. Most women in your position would be in a hotel tonight. Kelly's lips curve into a small, satisfied smile. It's a little early for wine, isn't it, Lois? She remarks with artificial concern. Her youth, barely 30 to Lois's 47, seems weaponized in the morning light. Lois raises her glass in a mock toast. When your husband of 15 years sells your home out from under you, there's no wrong time for wine. The crystal catches the light, a wedding gift from Jim's mother who had warned her with a tight smile that Miller men always get what they want. She sips her wine slowly, the rich flavor a stark contrast to the bitter taste of betrayal in her mouth. Her hand trembles slightly, but she maintains her composure, hiding the smile that threatens to emerge behind the rim of her glass. Let him think he'd won. Let him believe she was destroyed. He'd forgotten the prenup clause about infidelity, forfeitures, and that the secretary was her divorce attorney's niece. The arrangement had been Molly's idea, her brilliant attorney, and the only friend Jim hadn't managed to drive away during their marriage. Sometimes the best defense is letting them think they've already won, Molly had said 6 months ago, when Lois first discovered the affair. We're heading to Pebble Beach for the weekend, Jim announces, not bothering to look Lois in the eye as he walks toward the passenger door. Don't bother calling. The movers will be here Monday. Lois nods, taking another deliberate sip of wine. Have a wonderful time. Her tone is neutral, betraying nothing of the meticulously documented evidence of infidelity already secured in multiple locations, or the photographs of Jim and Kelly entering hotel rooms, or the financial records showing how he'd been systematically moving assets in preparation for what he thought would be his clean escape. As their car disappears down the long tree-lined driveway, gravel crunching beneath expensive tires, Lois allows herself to collapse onto the front steps, The facade of calm crumbles as she sets down her glass, hands now shaking visibly. But it's not despair that causes the trembling. It's adrenaline, anticipation, and the particular flavor of satisfaction that comes from knowing your opponent has catastrophically underestimated you. She pulls her phone from her pocket and sends a single text message to Molly. They've left. He signed the transfer documents yesterday as planned. Phase 1 complete. The response comes almost immediately. Perfect. Arthur has everything ready. Meeting at my office, 2 p.m. Lois looks back at the estate, the home where she arrived as a bride full of hope and naive trust, where she gradually lost her independence one small concession at a time, where she discovered last year that the partnership Jim had promised was nothing but a convenient fiction. Inside those walls, she had transformed from a confident professional with her own ambitions into the perfect corporate wife, always available for dinner parties, always agreeable, always accommodating. The slow erosion of her identity had been so gradual she barely noticed until she found herself asking permission to buy a new dress, apologizing for opinions that differed from his, cutting ties with friends he found difficult. She stands, smoothing her linen pants with steady hands now. The time for trembling is over. She'd spent the last 6 months meticulously preparing for this moment, documenting the affair, photographing evidence, securing copies of financial records, reconnecting with her professional network, and most importantly, allowing Jim to believe. She remained oblivious and dependent. His arrogance had made him careless. His certainty in her compliance had made him sloppy. The property transfer, his attempt to move their most valuable asset beyond her reach before filing for divorce, was exactly the action Molly had predicted. They had prepared for it, planned for it, and now would use it to spring the trap that would return everything to Lois with interest. Lois gathers her wine glass and walks back into the house, her bare feet silent on the marble floors of the grand foyer. She moves with new purpose toward Jim's study, the inner sanctum where she'd been increasingly unwelcome over the past year. The space is immaculate, masculine, designed to intimidate with its leather and mahogany, the bookshelves filled with volumes chosen more for appearance than content. She sits at his desk, opens the hidden compartment Tanner, her digital security consultant, had discovered and shown her months ago. Inside is the external drive containing Jim's private files, the ones he thought were secured behind passwords she couldn't possibly know. Passwords Tanner had extracted during what Jim believed was routine computer maintenance. Lois connects the drive to her own laptop, verifies that the most recent documents are there, including the fraudulent property transfer and the offshore account details Jim thought were untraceable. She smiles fully now, no wine glass to hide behind. Check, she whispers to the empty study, the first move in a game Jim doesn't even realize they're playing. Lois rises from Jim's desk, closing his laptop with a gentle click that belies the turmoil of the past months. She moves through the house, with new purpose, no longer the hesitant woman who second-guessed her every decision. In the master bedroom, a space recently dominated by Jim's preferences despite her repeated attempts to make it feel like shared territory, she kneels beside the antique chest at the foot of their bed. The key hangs around her neck on a thin, silver chain hidden beneath her blouse, touching her skin as a constant reminder of her secret preparations. The lock turns with a satisfying click, and she lifts the heavy wooden lid to reveal not the expected linens, but a carefully organized archive of evidence. Inside, divided by labeled folders, lies the comprehensive documentation of Jim's betrayal. Financial records showing the systematic movement of their joint assets into accounts she wasn't supposed to know existed. Photographs with timestamps proving his infidelity. Hotel receipts, copies of emails between Jim and his personal attorney, discussing divorce strategies, and, most importantly, the original prenuptial agreement with its critical infidelity clause highlighted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the event of infidelity by either party, Lois reads aloud, her finger tracing the words she's memorized. All assets acquired before and during the marriage shall be forfeited to the wronged spouse, including familial properties and holdings. She remembers the day they signed it, how Jim had laughed indulgently when she suggested the clause. "If it makes you feel better, sure," he'd said, pen poised above the document. "But it'll never apply to us." His confidence bordered on arrogance, the signature trait that would now become his undoing. Lois carefully returns the prenup to its folder, then reaches deeper into the chest to retrieve a small electronic device. The secure phone, provided by Tanner, the IT specialist whose services Jim had insisted upon for their home network, not realizing Tanner's true allegiance, contains communications untraceable to her regular devices. The conversations with Molly, with Kelly, with the financial forensics specialist who had helped her map Jim's hidden financial network, all preserved here, away from the digital ecosystem Jim controlled. She powers on the device, sends a brief encrypted message. Package. Secured. Proceeding to second location. The response is immediate. Confirmation received. Transportation standing by. Lois repacks the chest, locks it, and moves to the closet. Behind the rack of designer dresses Jim insisted she wear to his corporate functions, she retrieves a small suitcase already packed with essentials, not for escape, but for strategic retreat. The next phase requires her temporary absence from the estate, creating the illusion of defeat, while the legal machinery Molly has set in motion works invisibly behind the scenes. As she changes clothes, Lois catches her reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at her bears little resemblance to the one who used to ask permission for the smallest purchases, who monitored her words at dinner parties, who gradually surrendered her independence for the sake of peace. This woman stands straighter, her eyes clearer, jaw set with determination rather than tension. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It began 9 months ago with a misdirected text message from Kelly to Jim that appeared on his iPad, which he'd left signed into his accounts during one of his increasingly frequent business trips. The message, clearly referring to their intimate relationship, had initially shattered Lois, sending her into a spiral of self-doubt and recrimination. But that pain had crystallized into something else during a sleepless night as she reviewed their years together. The pattern emerged with stark clarity. The gradual isolation from friends and family, the incremental surrender of financial control, the subtle undermining of her confidence, and finally, the affair, not as an aberration, but as the inevitable next step in Jim's lifelong pattern of taking whatever he wanted. By morning, grief had hardened into resolve. Instead of confrontation, she chose strategic patience. Instead of emotional reactions, she opted for meticulous documentation. When Jim returned from his trip, she'd greeted him with the perfect smile of the compliant wife, her newfound knowledge concealed behind practiced pleasantries. That same day, she'd contacted Molly Marcus, the brilliant attorney she'd known in college, a friendship Jim had discouraged until it withered from neglect. The lunch meeting, disguised as a charity committee session in her calendar, became the foundation of her counteroffensive. Men like Jim rely on their wives' fear and shame, Molly had explained during that first strategy session. They expect emotional outbursts, tearful confrontations, reactions they've been dismissing as hysterical and irrational your entire marriage. Your power lies in denying him that expected response. Now, months later, as Lois zips the suitcase closed, she acknowledges the difficulty of that path. The strain of maintaining normalcy while systematically preparing her case had taken its toll. There were nights she nearly broke, almost confronted him just to end the charade. But each time, she'd reminded herself of the stakes, not just financial security, but reclaiming her dignity, her autonomy, her sense of self. The most unexpected element of her strategy had emerged when Molly mentioned her niece Kelly's search for employment after finishing her MBA. She's sharp, discreet, and looking for experience in financial services, Molly had said, the ghost of a plan forming between them. When Jim mentioned needing a new executive assistant 2 weeks later, Lois had casually suggested he interview this impressive young woman she'd met through her charity work. Jim, predictable in his appreciation for attractive, accomplished women, had hired Kelly immediately. What he didn't know, what his arrogance prevented him from discovering, was that Kelly's primary qualification was her willingness to participate in Molly's carefully orchestrated trap. Every private meeting, every inappropriate advance, every confidential document Jim shared with her had been meticulously documented and transmitted to Lois's legal team. The property transfer had been Kelly's masterpiece of manipulation. He needs to commit an unambiguous act that violates both your prenuptial agreement and possibly state law, Molly had explained. Something so egregious that no judge could ignore it. Kelly had planted the idea during one of their hotel rendezvous, framing it as protection for their future together. Lois lifts the suitcase, takes one last look around the bedroom. On the nightstand rests her regular phone, the one Jim monitors. She leaves it deliberately, another piece in the illusion of hasty retreat. The home security system, which automatically sends alerts to Jim's phone, will record her departure, showing him exactly what he expects to see. His wife fleeing in emotional disarray after being dispossessed. What it won't show is her destination. Not a hotel in tearful confusion, but Molly's well-appointed guest house, where the legal team will finalize their counterattack over the next 72 hours. As she walks down the grand staircase, Lois trails her fingers along the banister, remembering the first time she'd ascended it as Jim's fiancée, awed by the grandeur, interpreting his possessiveness as devotion. She doesn't hate this house despite the painful memories. Rather, she appreciates the symmetry of using it as the centerpiece of his downfall. Outside, Arthur, Molly's trusted driver, waits with a nondescript sedan, nothing like the luxury vehicles Jim insisted upon. As Arthur places her suitcase in the trunk, Lois looks back at the estate, allowing herself a small, satisfied smile. "Ready, ma'am?" Arthur asks, holding the door. "More than ready," Lois replies, sliding into the back seat. It's time for phase 2. The sedan pulls away from the estate, gravel crunching beneath the tires as Arthur navigates down the tree-lined driveway. Lois doesn't look back. Instead, she watches the gates grow smaller in the side mirror, symbolic of the boundaries she's finally crossing. The immaculate hedges and wrought iron details that once felt like protection now seem more like the ornate bars of a beautiful cage she's escaping. "Traffic report says we should avoid the parkway, Mrs. Miller," Arthur says, his voice professional but kind. "I've mapped an alternate route that should keep us clear of any congestion." "Thank you, Arthur," Lois replies, appreciating his attention to detail. "And please, call me Lois." Arthur nods in acknowledgement, his eyes meeting hers briefly in the rearview mirror. There's understanding there, a recognition of her situation that requires no elaboration. As Molly's driver for 15 years, he's undoubtedly transported other women through similar transitions, from facades of security to authentic if uncertain futures. The landscape changes as they leave the exclusive enclave where the Miller estate stands. Manicured lawns give way to more modest neighborhoods, then to the commercial district, and finally to the vibrant, diverse urban center, where Molly's law offices occupy the 15th floor of a modern glass building. This transition mirrors Lois's own journey, from isolated privilege to reconnection with the broader world. During her years with Jim, her existence had contracted to the carefully curated environments he preferred: the estate, the country club, the exclusive restaurants where he was known by name, the vacation properties owned by people exactly like them. Arthur pulls into the private parking garage beneath the building, using a key card to access a reserved section away from public areas. This discretion isn't accidental. Molly has orchestrated every detail to ensure Jim remains unaware of Lois's precise movements. The security camera blind spot where they exit the vehicle, the service elevator that bypasses the main lobby, the unmarked door that leads directly to Molly's suite of offices, all carefully planned. "Lois!" Molly exclaims as they enter, rising from behind her imposing desk to embrace her old friend. At 52, Molly Marcus carries herself with the confidence of a woman who has built her reputation by dismantling the financial empires of unfaithful spouses. Her silver-streaked dark hair is pulled back in a precise knot, her charcoal suit immaculately tailored, but her eyes remain as warm and fierce as they were in college. "Right on schedule," she continues, guiding Lois to a comfortable seating area where Tanner and a woman Lois doesn't recognize are already waiting. The room bears little resemblance to stereotypical law offices. No imposing bookcases or leather-bound volumes, just clean modern lines, state-of-the-art technology, and a wall of windows overlooking the city. "You remember Tanner," Molly says, unnecessarily. The young IT specialist gives Lois a small wave, his informal manner contrasting with the professional setting. "And this is Linda Vasquez, our financial forensics specialist. She's been analyzing the documentation you've provided." Linda rises, extending her hand. "Mrs. Miller, I have to say, your record-keeping has been exceptional. Most clients in your situation don't have nearly this level of detail." "Please, it's Lois," she replies, shaking Linda's hand. "And I can't take all the credit. Once I understood what was happening, preservation became almost instinctive." They settle into their seats as Arthur brings in a tray with coffee and water before discreetly exiting. The atmosphere shifts from welcoming to focused efficiency. "So," Molly begins, "Jim has made his move with the property transfer. Exactly as predicted and exactly as we'd hoped." She nods to Linda, who opens a laptop. "The timing is particularly advantageous," Linda explains, turning the screen so Lois can see the complex financial model displayed. "We've been tracking Jim's liquidity patterns. Right now he's overextended in several investment positions he can't easily unwind. The property transfer to Kelly represents an attempt to shelter his most significant unencumbered asset." Tanner leans forward, adding, "And I've confirmed through the remote access we established that he's accelerated the timeline for something called Project Avalanche. Based on the communications I've intercepted, it appears to be his exit strategy, moving substantial assets offshore while manufacturing business losses to offset his tax liability." Lois absorbs this information, connecting it with patterns she'd observed over recent months. Jim's late-night phone calls, his unusual interest in certain international banking regulations, his sudden concern about her schedule and whereabouts. "He's planning to file for divorce next week," she concludes, the pieces falling into place. "After the Westridge Foundation Gala." Molly nods, impressed but not surprised by Lois's insight. "We believe so. The gala provides him with one last public appearance as the devoted husband before he executes the final phase. Classic misdirection." Outside the windows, clouds gather over the city skyline, the weather shifting to match the gravity of their discussion. The view encompasses both the exclusive hillside district where the Miller estate stands and the commercial harbor that had once been the center of Lois's professional life before marriage. The contrast feels significant. Two worlds. She's navigated, two versions of herself. "Tell me about the evidence package," Lois says, refocusing on the immediate strategy. Linda opens a secure file on her laptop, displaying a meticulously organized digital archive. "We've categorized everything according to legal relevance: financial, documentation, evidence of infidelity, communication records, property holdings, both disclosed and undisclosed. The prenuptial agreement is our cornerstone," Molly adds. Jim's arrogance in agreeing to that infidelity clause without considering its implications is perhaps his most significant miscalculation. That, combined with the fraudulent property transfer, gives us extraordinary leverage. The room falls silent as they all contemplate the strength of their position, a silence broken by a gentle knock at the door. Arthur enters, followed by Kelly, who has changed from her executive attire into jeans and a simple blouse, her transformation from Jim's conquest to their ally now complete. "Sorry I'm late," Kelly says, taking the remaining seat. "I had to make sure Jim's plane took off before I could leave. He wanted me to send him confirmation of your departure from the estate." She looks at Lois. "I took the liberty of forwarding him the security alert when you left. He seemed pleased." There's distaste in Kelly's voice as she relates this information. Despite her role in the deception, she's developed genuine respect for Lois over the months of their collaboration. "Perfect," Molly responds. "The more confident he feels, the less likely he is to detect our countermoves." Lois studies the team, assembled around her, each person bringing specialized skills to this carefully orchestrated response to Jim's betrayal. The contrast with her isolation of just months ago is stark. Where Jim had systematically disconnected her from support systems, she had now rebuilt a network based on professional respect and shared purpose. "There's one more thing you should know," Tanner says, looking up from his tablet. "Jim's made contact with Mike Reynolds. The name hangs in the air, significant to everyone present. His divorce attorney from the Lancaster case," Molly notes, her expression darkening. "Aggressive, unethical, but effective." "Which means we proceed immediately to Phase 3, Lois concludes, meeting Molly's eyes with determination. "If Jim's bringing in Reynolds, he's preparing for a scorched earth approach." Outside, the gathering storm breaks, rain streaming down the windows as lightning illuminates the cityscape. Within the secure conference room, Lois feels a corresponding surge of energy. Not the desperate anger Jim might expect, but the focused resolve of someone who has found her strength in the very crisis designed to break her. Morning light filters through the blinds of Molly's guest house, where Lois has spent a restless night. Despite the comfortable surroundings, sleep eluded her. Not from anxiety, but from the peculiar energy that comes with standing at a pivotal crossroads. She sits at the kitchen island, nursing a cup of coffee, when a gentle knock announces Molly's arrival. "I brought breakfast," Molly says, setting down a bag of pastries. "Fuel for the day ahead," Lois smiles gratefully. "You remember I can't resist almond croissants?" "Some things never change," Molly replies, preparing her own coffee. "Unlike everything else in your life right now." The observation hangs between them, profound in its simplicity. Molly has always possessed this ability, cutting through complexity to identify the essential truth. "I keep thinking about choices," Lois says after a moment. "How we make them without realizing they're choices. How one decision leads to another until you find yourself living a life you don't recognize." Molly sits across from her, eyes thoughtful. "The frog in gradually heating water." Exactly. Each accommodation seemed reasonable at the time. Give up my job because Jim's promotion meant we didn't need the income. Move further from the city because the estate offered more quality of life. Let him handle the finances because he was the expert. Each step made sense in isolation. Until they formed a pattern, Molly observes. A pattern I couldn't see until I was already trapped in it. Lois breaks a piece from her croissant but doesn't eat it. "Do you know what frightens me most, Molly? Not the legal battle or even the uncertainty. It's that I almost didn't wake up to what was happening. If that text hadn't appeared on his iPad—" "But it did," Molly interrupts firmly. "And you did wake up. That's what matters." Is it, though? What about all the women who never get that moment of clarity? Who continue living lives that shrink smaller every year? Molly considers this, her expression somber. That's why what happens next is about more than just you and Jim. It's about accountability and consequences. It's about systems that enable this type of control and challenging those systems. Lois nods slowly, understanding dawning. The personal as political. Just like we used to discuss in Professor Harrington's feminist theory class, Molly confirms with a small smile. Before you switched to business and I went to law school, the reference to their shared past brings unexpected emotion to Lois's throat. During her years with Jim, those formative experiences had faded, relegated to the category of youthful idealism rather than foundational principles. I forgot who I was, she admits quietly. Not all at once, but in increments. Identity isn't static, Lois. We all evolve. The question is whether that evolution is authentic or imposed. Molly reaches across the counter to cover Lois's hand with her own. You're reclaiming your authentic evolution now. That's what matters. The simple gesture of support, impossible to quantify in legal strategy or financial terms, grounds Lois in a way nothing else has. This connection to her past self through Molly creates continuity, a thread running through the disparate chapters of her life. There's something I haven't told the team yet, Lois says, meeting Molly's gaze directly. About what I want from all this. Molly waits, giving her the space to continue. Everyone assumes I want the estate, the assets, the financial security, and I do. They represent years of my life, my contributions, my sacrifices. Lois straightens, her resolve visible. But what I really want is restoration. Not just of property, but of narrative. Jim didn't just take my financial independence. He rewrote my story, made me secondary in my own life. Understanding illuminates Molly's face. This isn't just about the prenup clause or the property transfer. No, it's about establishing truth. I want the record to reflect reality, in legal documents, in financial statements, in our social circle. I want the years of systematic erasure acknowledged and corrected. Molly nods slowly, the attorney in her calculating implications while the friend recognizes the profound nature of this goal. That's more challenging than simply enforcing financial penalties. It requires strategic transparency, revealing enough to correct the record without seeming vindictive. Is it possible? With the evidence we've compiled? Absolutely. Molly's confidence is unwavering, but it requires something from you that might be difficult. What's that? Complete emotional detachment in public. Jim will attempt to portray you as irrational, vindictive, driven by jealousy or bitterness. The moment you show anger, however justified, you play into that narrative. Lois absorbs this, recognizing the challenge. Containing righteous anger for strategic purposes would test her newly reclaimed strength. That's why you insisted I not confront him when I first discovered the affair. Precisely. Confrontation would have given him time to prepare, to hide, assets, to control the narrative. Your restraint has been your secret weapon. Molly pauses, studying her friend. But maintaining that restraint as events unfold publicly will be even more demanding. Outside the window, a garden comes to life with morning activity. Birds at feeders, squirrels navigating branches, the steady work of a solitary beekeeper tending hives at the far end of the property. Life continuing its cycles regardless of human drama. When I was a child, Lois says, watching the beekeeper, my grandmother kept hives. She told me something I've been thinking about lately. The bee that panics in the hive never finds its way out. The one that remains calm discovers the path to freedom. Molly smiles at the metaphor. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. She also said something else. Sometimes the sweetest victory is the one your opponent never sees coming. Lois turns back to Molly, new resolve in her expression. I can maintain whatever composure this requires, because I understand what's truly at stake. This moment crystallizes something essential between them, a recognition that the coming conflict transcends typical divorce proceedings. It represents a reclamation not just of assets but of agency, not just of property but of personhood. Then let's formalize our approach, Molly says, her tone shifting to professional clarity. The evidence we've gathered serves multiple purposes: legally enforcing the prenuptial agreement, documenting the fraudulent property transfer, and, most importantly, establishing the pattern of control that culminated in these actions. Lois nods, grateful for Molly's understanding of the deeper dimensions at play. And Kelly's testimony will be crucial. Not just about the affair, but about how Jim spoke about me, the plans he outlined, his assumption that he could discard 15 years of marriage with no consequences. Kelly's role is indeed pivotal. Jim never considered she might have autonomy and ethics of her own, another reflection of how he views women generally. This observation lands with particular weight. Throughout their marriage, Lois had witnessed Jim's dismissive attitude toward women in professional settings, his condescension thinly veiled as chivalry, his assumption that feminine appearance equated to manipulability. There's a certain symmetry in his downfall being orchestrated entirely by women he underestimated, Lois notes, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Poetic justice has its appeal, Molly agrees with a small smile. But remember, our primary goal is restoration of truth, not retribution. The distinction will matter both legally and personally. The sun has fully risen now, illuminating the guest house kitchen with clear morning light. In this moment of shared understanding, Lois feels something she hasn't experienced in years: genuine alignment between her inner convictions and her outward circumstances, the relief of authentic purpose replacing performative existence. Truth as restoration, Lois says, the phrase capturing the essence of what lies ahead. Not just for me, but for every woman who's been systematically diminished while being told she's being protected. Every professional who's been patronized while being praised. Molly nods, recognizing the universal in the particular. That's why documentation matters so much in these cases. Each record is a stone in the foundation of reality, immovable once placed correctly. As they prepare to join the legal team for the day's strategy session, Lois carries this framework with her, not as an abstract concept, but as a navigational tool. The coming days will test her resolve, her composure, and her newfound strength. But with clarity of purpose, each challenge becomes not an obstacle, but a necessary step toward reclaiming her authentic life. The conference room at Molly's law office has transformed into a command center, walls covered with timelines, financial charts, and relationship maps. In the center of this organized chaos, Lois stands before a detailed chronology of her relationship with Jim. The team has encouraged her to reconstruct the evolution of their marriage, not for emotional catharsis, but for strategic documentation. Let's talk about the beginning, Linda suggests, her financial forensics expertise momentarily set aside for this crucial narrative exercise. How did you and Jim first meet? Lois touches a point on the timeline marked First Encounter, her, mind traveling back 15 years to a different version of herself. It was the Westridge Foundation's annual charity gala, she begins, the memory surprisingly vivid. I was there representing the Harbor Redevelopment Coalition where I worked. As Director of Community Partnerships, we'd received a grant for an economic impact study. The room seems to fade around her as the memory takes shape. The glittering ballroom, the orchestral music, the carefully calibrated social dynamics of wealth and influence. I was speaking with the Foundation's chairman about implementation. Timelines when Jim approached. He introduced himself as a new board member, just returned from 3 years in their London office. In her memory, Jim appears as he was then, 40 years old, impeccably dressed in a tuxedo that suggested old money rather than new wealth, confident but not yet revealing the arrogance that would emerge later. His smile had reached his eyes. Then, something she hadn't seen in years. He asked intelligent questions about the harbor project, not the superficial interest most board members showed, but specific inquiries about sustainable development and community integration. I was impressed. Tanner looks up from his tablet where he's documenting these recollections. So he presented himself as socially conscious from the beginning? Yes, though in retrospect, he was primarily assessing the investment potential. But he listened when I spoke, really listened. That was compelling. Lois pauses, acknowledging the irony. I later learned he'd researched me specifically before the gala. The attentiveness wasn't spontaneous, it was strategic. Molly makes a note. Classic predatory patterning. Identify targets' values, mirror them back, create artificial alignment. Lois nods, continuing. After the gala, he called the coalition office asking for a private tour of the harbor development sites. Said he wanted to better understand the project before the next funding cycle. I agreed, of course. Cultivating bored. Relationships was part of my job. The memory shifts to the waterfront. A bright autumn afternoon, industrial buildings being transformed into mixed-use spaces, cranes against a clear blue sky. Jim had appeared genuinely engaged, asking questions that demonstrated either thorough preparation or genuine interest. He'd brought coffee exactly how she preferred it, another detail that seemed thoughtful rather than calculated at the time. After the tour, he suggested dinner to discuss potential private sector partnerships. Professional, not personal, at least initially. Lois smiles faintly at her younger self's naivety. By dessert, the conversation had shifted entirely to personal interests. He seemed fascinated by my background in urban planning, my volunteer, work with women's shelters, even my college activism. Mirroring your values while gathering information, Kelly observes, recognizing the pattern from her own interactions with Jim. When did the relationship transition from professional to personal? Linda asks, bringing the focus back to the timeline. 3 more business meetings over 2 weeks. Then he sent orchids to my office. Not roses or something obvious. Orchids because I'd mentioned my grandmother's greenhouse once. Lois points to the next marker on the timeline. He asked me to dinner at Aurelia's, explicitly as a date, not a business meeting. Aurelia's, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, where reservations required connections rather than merely money. The implied message hadn't been subtle. Jim had access to worlds closed to most people, and he was offering to share that access. He was charming, attentive, interested in my opinions. When I challenged his perspectives, he didn't become defensive. He engaged thoughtfully. Lois shakes her head slightly. At least, that's how it appeared. When did the power dynamic begin to shift? Molly asks, identifying the crucial transition point. Lois considers this carefully. The first substantial shift came 3 months in, when he suggested I accompany him to a conference in Paris. I'd planned to use my vacation time for volunteer work in Central America. He made a substantial donation to the organization in my name, then presented the Paris trip as allowing me to do both, support the cause financially while still enjoying a romantic getaway. The first instance of substituting his preferences for yours while framing it as generosity, Molly notes. Exactly. My first accommodation, small enough to seem ungrateful to refuse, significant enough to establish a pattern of him directing major decisions. Lois moves to the next section of the timeline. 2 months after Paris, he proposed. The ring had belonged to his grandmother, a family heirloom he said had been waiting for the right woman. The memory of that evening crystallizes. A private dining room overlooking the harbor she'd helped revitalize. Jim kneeling beside the table, the vintage platinum setting catching the candlelight. The perfect moment, choreographed down to the string quartet playing in the background. I said yes, immediately. We'd only known each other 5 months, but it felt, she searches for the right word. Inevitable, somehow. Like the natural progression of something extraordinary. When did discussions about the prenuptial agreement begin? Linda asks, connecting emotional history to financial strategy. 2 weeks after the engagement. Jim presented it as standard procedure given his family's estate and position. The initial draft was entirely one-sided, designed to protect his assets while offering minimal protection for mine. "And the infidelity clause?" Molly prompts. Lois's expression shifts subtly, a mixture of irony and vindication. "That was my addition. The original agreement made no mention of fidelity consequences. I remember saying if we were truly committed to building a life together, infidelity shouldn't be a financial non-event." "How did Jim respond?" Tanner asks, looking up from his notes. "He laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. Said he had no objections because it would never be relevant." Lois's voice takes on a harder edge. "He signed it without consulting his attorney about the implications because he never considered it would apply to him, only to me." The room absorbs this information, recognizing its significance to their current strategy. Jim's dismissal of the clause as irrelevant revealed a fundamental asymmetry in how he viewed their relationship from the very beginning. Rules that constrained her, but not him. "The wedding was 4 months later," Lois continues, moving the timeline forward. "Lavish but tasteful. 300 guests, most of whom I didn't know. His mother oversaw most details, another early concession I made to family tradition. She recalls standing at the altar of the historic cathedral, Jim handsome and composed beside her, the weight of familial expectations almost palpable in the air. The vows they'd exchanged now hollow in retrospect, promises made with fundamentally different understandings of their meaning. "When did you leave your position at the Harbor Coalition?" Kelly asks, connecting professional changes to relationship dynamics. 6 months after the wedding, Jim received a significant promotion that required more travel, more social obligations. He suggested, never demanded, always suggested, that my work schedule created unnecessary complications. Lois remembers the careful phrasing, how reasonable it had seemed at the time. He emphasized that his income more than compensated for mine, that I could focus on philanthropy instead, that we could have more time together if I had a flexible schedule. "And you agreed," Molly observes, not as judgment, but as acknowledgement of the subtle coercion at work. "I did. It seemed like a logical adjustment, a mutual compromise." Lois's voice carries no self-recrimination, only analytical clarity. "That decision marked the beginning of my financial dependence, though I didn't recognize it then." The timeline before them tells the rest of the story in dispassionate markers. Lois's gradual isolation from professional networks, the transition of financial control to Jim's exclusive management, the subtle replacement of her friends with his colleagues, her increasing need to seek permission for independent decisions. Each individual change had seemed reasonable within its immediate context. Only when assembled chronologically did the deliberate pattern emerge, the systematic dismantling of Lois's independence under the guise of partnership and protection. "This timeline isn't just about emotional context," Molly explains to the team. "It establishes the foundation for our legal argument, a pattern of control culminating in financial exploitation." Lois studies the completed chronology, seeing not just her personal history, but a recognizable template, one repeated in countless marriages where incremental power shifts accumulate into comprehensive control. "The most effective traps," she says quietly, "are the ones you don't see until you're already caught in them." The strategy session breaks for lunch, team members dispersing briefly to clear their minds before the afternoon's intensive work. Lois finds herself alone in Molly's office, drawn to the wall of photographs documenting her friend's career milestones and family moments, a visual testament to a life built on her own terms. As she studies these images, Lois's mind travels through the incremental shifts that transformed her marriage from apparent partnership to elegant captivity. The changes had been so gradual, so seemingly reasonable in isolation, that recognizing the pattern required deliberate retrospection. When Molly returns with sandwiches from the deli across the street, she finds Lois lost in thought. Mapping. "The deterioration?" Molly asks with characteristic insight, setting down the food. Lois nods. It's like watching erosion in time-lapse. Each individual wave seems harmless, but eventually the entire shoreline is gone. Tell me about the progression, Molly suggests, recognizing the therapeutic and strategic value of articulating this pattern. After you left your position at the Harbor Coalition, what changed next? Lois accepts a sandwich but doesn't immediately eat. The financial restructuring began almost immediately. Jim suggested consolidating our accounts for simplicity and tax efficiency. Separate accounts seemed unnecessarily complicated when we were building a life together. And you agreed. I did. It made sense within the narrative we'd established. Partners, making practical decisions together. Lois's voice carries no self-recrimination, only analytical clarity. Within 3 months, I no longer had independent access to our investments or significant assets. Everything required Jim's authorization. Was this explicitly stated or implied? Implied through process. When I needed funds beyond household expenses, the procedure became asking Jim rather than accessing accounts directly. He never refused early on. That would have been too obvious. He simply established himself as the gatekeeper. Molly makes notes as Lois continues, documenting the methodical dismantling of financial autonomy that paralleled changes in other domains. The social isolation was equally gradual. First, it was subtle comments about certain friends, how Diane seemed uncomfortable around wealth, how my college roommate Kelly seemed to want something from us, how my cousin Maria's husband had political views that could damage Jim's standing with clients. These observations, presented as protective concerns rather than control mechanisms, had successfully distanced Lois from her support network one relationship at a time. Then came the scheduling conflicts. Any gathering I organized somehow coincided, with important client dinners requiring my presence. Professional conferences I wanted to attend overlapped with events where Jim needed me beside him. Eventually, my social circle became exclusively people Jim had vetted and approved, mostly his colleagues' wives and carefully selected philanthropic connections. Molly's expression reflects understanding rather than judgment. The physical isolation followed the social. Yes. The move from our downtown apartment to the estate happened 3 years in. Jim presented it as giving us the lifestyle we deserved, but it effectively removed me from easy access to independent activities. Lois recalls the transition from walkable urban neighborhood to gated suburban enclave, where even basic errands required coordinated transportation. He sold my car as part of the move, replacing it with shared access to the household vehicles, which required coordination with his schedule and needs. And your professional identity? Redirected rather than eliminated. Jim connected me with the charitable foundation attached to his firm. I was appointed to the board, seemingly prestigious, but effectively keeping my activities within his sphere of influence. Lois remembers the initial pride she'd felt at this appointment, not recognizing it as another form of containment. Any meaningful decisions required consensus from board members who were either Jim's business associates or their spouses. As they proceed through lunch, Lois methodically maps the progressive constriction of her autonomy. Subtle shifts in financial freedom, social connections, physical mobility, and professional identity. Each change had been framed as an enhancement to their shared life rather than a limitation of her individual agency. When did you begin to feel the dissonance? Molly asks, identifying the crucial psychological transition. Lois considers this carefully. There were small moments of awareness that I suppressed. Questions about expenses that received vague answers. Suggestions I made that were dismissed then later presented as Jim's ideas. But the first significant moment came during a dinner with the Harrisons. The memory surfaces with unexpected clarity, an elegant dinner party at a colleague's home 5 years into their marriage. Lois had shared an opinion about municipal bond markets based on her urban planning background. Jim had smiled indulgently, placed his hand over hers, and said, Darling, you're confusing municipal development with municipal finance. They're entirely different domains. I knew I wasn't confused. Lois continues. Municipal development was my field of expertise, but everyone at the table nodded along with Jim's correction. Later that night, I showed him the research supporting my position. Instead of acknowledging his error, he suggested I'd misunderstood my own sources. Gaslighting, Molly observes, undermining your confidence in your own knowledge and perception. After that, I noticed it more frequently. Subtle corrections to my recollections of events, dismissal of concerns as overthinking, attributing emotional responses to stress or hormones rather than legitimate reactions to problematic situations. The systematic nature of these interactions becomes evident as Lois outlines them, not random insensitivities but coordinated efforts to destabilize her trust in her own judgment. The physical intimacy changed too, Lois adds, addressing an aspect of deterioration often overlooked in legal contexts, but critical to understanding the comprehensive nature of control. What began as mutual evolved into transactional. My needs became secondary, then irrelevant, then unacknowledged. Molly nods, understanding the significance of this dimension. Another domain where imbalance was normalized. Completely. And when I attempted to address it, Jim framed it as a natural evolution, suggesting that passionate connection inevitably gives way to comfortable familiarity, that expecting more was somehow immature. This pattern of normalizing inequity extended throughout their marriage, redefining Lois's reasonable expectations as unrealistic, her legitimate concerns as emotional overreactions. The surveillance began about 4 years ago, Lois continues, approaching the final stages of deterioration. Initially presented as security updates to the estate systems, but gradually expanding to monitor my activities. Cameras in common areas, GPS tracking on vehicles, monitoring software on shared devices, all framed as protection rather than control. Tanner enters, catching the end of this explanation. The system architecture was comprehensive, he confirms, having analyzed the estate's security infrastructure. Far beyond standard home security needs, more aligned with surveillance objectives than protection protocols. Lois acknowledges this assessment with a grim nod. By last year, I had to actively create workarounds just to have private conversations. The estate phone lines were recorded for security purposes. My emails were accessible on shared family accounts. Even my schedule required justification for any deviation from expected patterns. The complete picture emerges through these recollections, a systematic dismantling of autonomy across every domain of life, implemented so gradually that each individual change seemed reasonable while the cumulative effect was comprehensive. Control. The most insidious aspect, Lois concludes, was how the narrative framed it all as privilege rather than confinement. The estate wasn't an isolated location, but an exclusive address. Financial restrictions weren't control, but expert management. Social limitations weren't isolation, but quality over quantity. Each constraint was presented as an enhancement to our lives rather than a limitation of mine. Molly closes her notebook, the documentation of deterioration now complete. This pattern will be crucial in court, not just for establishing the context of the financial maneuvers, but for demonstrating the comprehensive nature of the control mechanisms that culminated in them. Lois stands, moving to the window that overlooks the city where she once moved freely, where her professional identity had flourished, where relationships had been based on genuine connection rather than strategic value. The most effective prison, she says quietly, is the one where the prisoner believes the walls are for protection rather than confinement. This insight, earned through years of subtle manipulation and now crystallized through methodical analysis, will form the foundation of their case, transforming personal experience into documented evidence of a recognizable pattern of control and exploitation. 9 months earlier, The Miller estate stands quiet in the pale glow of early morning. Jim has departed for a 3-day investment conference in Chicago, leaving Lois to the familiar solitude that has become her default state. She moves through their bedroom with practiced efficiency, gathering laundry for the housekeeper who will arrive later that morning. As she collects Jim's discarded clothes, a notification chimes from his iPad on the nightstand, the device he uses primarily for travel, but had forgotten in his rush to make an early flight. The screen illuminates with, "A message preview, can't wait for tonight. The hotel confirmed the corner suite. Bringing that lingerie you liked in Milan." Chloe freezes, the laundry basket balanced against her hip, staring at the notification as though it might transform into something innocuous if she looks long. Enough. Her mind races through possibilities. A colleague confirming legitimate business arrangements, a message meant for someone else and sent to Jim by mistake, a travel agent confirming details. But deep down, she knows. The iPad chimes again, with a follow-up message, "Don't forget to delete these from your primary phone this time. Your wife almost saw last month." The confirmation strikes with physical force, causing Lois to sit heavily on the edge of the bed, laundry forgotten. She reaches for the iPad with trembling fingers, hesitates, then makes a decision that will alter the trajectory of her life. Instead of unlocking the device, which would alert Jim that someone had accessed it, she takes a photograph of the screen with her own phone, documenting the messages exactly as they appear. For several minutes, she sits motionless, absorbing the implications. The affair itself feels almost secondary to the revelation contained in the second message. "Your wife almost saw last month." This isn't new. This isn't a momentary lapse. This is an established pattern, one Jim has been actively concealing, while maintaining their outward appearance of marital stability. When Lois finally moves, it's with unexpected calm. She completes the laundry collection, arranges the iPad exactly as she found it, and proceeds downstairs to prepare her morning tea. The routine actions provide cover for her racing thoughts, as she evaluates options with newfound clarity. Confrontation holds no appeal. It would simply prompt denials, gaslighting, or carefully crafted explanations that would make her doubt the evidence of her own eyes. More importantly, it would alert Jim that she knows, eliminating any strategic advantage her awareness might provide. Instead, Lois reaches for her phone and calls the one person whose judgment she still trusts implicitly despite years of engineered distance. "Molly Marcus," the crisp professional voice answers on the third ring. "Molly, it's Lois." Lois Miller. She hesitates, the name itself feeling like a borrowed identity rather than her own. I need your help. Can we meet somewhere private? Today, if possible." Something in her tone must convey the urgency because Molly responds without hesitation. "Of course. My office has a private entrance. I can see you at noon." That meeting, the first step in Lois's reclamation of agency, set in motion the carefully orchestrated counter-strategy now unfolding. But it was the subsequent discovery that transformed suspicion into irrefutable evidence. In the present, Lois stands before the legal team in Molly's conference room, recounting this pivotal moment. The text messages confirmed the affair, but they were just the beginning, she explains, accessing a secure folder on her private device. 2 days after meeting with Molly, while Jim was still away, I made a more significant discovery. Tanner leans forward, professional interest piqued. As the team's digital forensics expert, he appreciates the methodical documentation Lois had undertaken without technical guidance. "Jim's briefcase," Lois continues. "He always keeps it locked. That morning he'd left in such a hurry he forgot to secure it." Inside, I found a folder labeled Project Eclipse. She displays photographs taken in sequence, each document carefully captured without disrupting their original organization, timestamps visible in each image. The folder contained draft divorce filings, asset valuations significantly underreporting their holdings, and a strategic timeline for what Jim called optimal separation execution. The documents outlined a 6-month plan, Lois explains, her voice steady, despite the personal betrayal these materials represent. Financial restructuring to minimize my claim on assets, strategic transfers to accounts I had no access to, gradual removal of my personal items from the estate under the guise of renovation storage. The timeline even included a section labeled Narrative Management, detailed plans for controlling how their social and professional circles would perceive the divorce. Jim had mapped out which friends would be told what version of events, which colleagues would receive strategic confidences, how the story would unfold to minimize his liability and maximize sympathy for his position. Most critically, Lois continues, displaying the final documents from the folder, there was correspondence with Mike Reynolds dated 3 months earlier, establishing that Jim had been consulting with divorce counsel while still presenting our marriage as stable and secure. Linda examines these materials with professional focus. This correspondence predates any transfers we've been tracking. It establishes premeditation in the financial restructuring. The level of calculation is remarkable, Kelly observes, her face reflecting genuine dismay despite her role in the counter-strategy. He mapped out every aspect of your dismantling as methodically as a corporate acquisition. Lois nods, the personal impact of this calculation still profound despite months of processing. What struck me most was the timeline. He'd planned to wait until after my birthday celebration, a lavish party he was organizing, apparently as a public display of devotion before initiating divorce proceedings 3 weeks later. This detail, the performance of affection as strategic misdirection, had crystallized for Lois the comprehensive nature of Jim's deception. Their entire relationship had been recontextualized in that moment, 15 years of shared history suddenly revealing patterns previously invisible. After finding these documents, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty, Lois continues. First, that Jim had been systematically planning my financial and social devastation for months. Second, that direct confrontation would be catastrophic. It would simply accelerate his timeline while eliminating any opportunity for me to protect myself. Instead of emotional reaction, Lois had chosen strategic response. She had photographed every document, returned them to exactly their original state, and secured the briefcase precisely as she had found it. Jim never realized his security lapse, had exposed his entire strategy. That discovery was the true turning point, Molly adds for the team's benefit. When Lois first came to me with evidence of the affair, we discussed standard divorce options. Finding the Eclipse documents fundamentally changed our approach, revealing we weren't dealing with marital breakdown, but with calculated exploitation. Tanner displays the secure digital archive they've created. Every document, text message, financial record, and photograph organized chronologically and backed up in multiple secure locations. This level of documentation is extraordinary, he notes. Most clients in similar situations have fragments of evidence. Lois created a comprehensive record. I had no choice, Lois responds simply. Once I understood what was happening, preservation became instinctive. This instinct for preservation, emerging from years of having her perceptions questioned and memories invalidated, had served her perfectly in this crisis. The woman Jim had systematically conditioned to doubt herself had instead developed a reflexive need to document reality, creating an unassailable record of his deception. The pivotal discovery wasn't just finding evidence of Jim's betrayal, Lois concludes, addressing the deeper significance. It was recognizing that I had options beyond the binary choices he'd structured for me, either remaining in ignorant compliance or engaging in emotional confrontation that would ultimately serve his interests. In that moment of revelation, standing in Jim's study with incontrovertible evidence of his calculated betrayal, Lois had experienced not just anger or heartbreak, but a fundamental shift in perspective. The marriage she had worked so diligently to maintain revealed itself as an elaborate construction designed to benefit one partner at the expense of the other. The rules she had scrupulously followed were shown to be entirely unilateral. This clarity, painful but ultimately liberating, had enabled the strategic patience demonstrated in the subsequent months. Rather than acting from emotion, Lois had operated from calculation, matching Jim's premeditation with her own methodical counter-strategy. When I realized the comprehensive nature of his deception, she tells the team, something fundamental changed. I stopped seeing our marriage as a relationship to be saved and started seeing it as a situation requiring strategic response. That shift in perspective made everything else possible. The team absorbs this insight, recognizing its significance beyond Lois's specific circumstances. The pivotal discovery had transformed her understanding not just of her marriage, but of her agency within it, replacing reactive emotion with strategic clarity, converting victimization into methodical response. And that brings us to our current position, Molly concludes, transitioning the discussion toward their immediate tactical considerations. Jim believes he's executing his eclipse strategy precisely as planned. Our advantage lies in his complete unawareness that we've been anticipating and countering each move since the beginning. As the team turns to planning their next steps, Lois stands at the center of a strategy she has helped architect, no longer the unwitting target of someone else's calculations, but the primary architect of her own liberation. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across Molly's office as a new figure enters the conference room. Carlos Vasquez, renowned forensic accountant and expert witness in high-profile divorce cases, carries himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to uncovering hidden truths in financial labyrinths. His silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses give him a scholarly appearance that belies the sharp analytical mind that has dismantled countless financial deceptions. "Sorry I'm late," he says, setting his leather briefcase on the conference table. Court ran longer than expected. He extends his hand to Lois. "Mrs. Miller, I've heard a great deal about your situation. Molly speaks highly of your documentation skills." Lois shakes his hand, immediately sensing the steady competence that has made Carlos Molly's go-to financial expert for her most challenging cases. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Vasquez." "Carlos, please," he corrects with a warm smile. "We'll be working closely over the coming weeks." Molly makes quick introductions for the rest of the team before Carlos opens his briefcase and retrieves a tablet. "I've completed my preliminary analysis of the financial materials you provided," he explains, projecting a complex diagram onto the wall screen. "And I must say, in 23 years of forensic accounting, I've rarely seen such comprehensive manipulation or such meticulous counter-documentation." The diagram reveals an intricate web of accounts, transfers, and entities. Jim's financial structure mapped with clinical precision. Color coding indicates legitimate transactions in blue, questionable movements in yellow, and clearly fraudulent activities in red. The visualization makes immediately apparent what narrative explanations might obscure: a systematic pattern of financial deception spanning at least 4 years. "Mr. Miller has created what we call a cascade structure," Carlos E. explains, using a laser pointer to indicate key nodes in the financial web. Assets move through multiple entities before reaching their destination, creating the illusion of legitimate business transactions while obscuring the ultimate beneficiary. He zooms in on a particular section. These 3 entities, Horizon Holdings, Apex Ventures, and Blue Harbor LLC, exist solely to create transaction pathways. They have no employees, no physical offices, and no business activities beyond moving assets from point A to point B. Lois studies the diagram, recognizing some entities but surprised by others. "I knew about Horizon, but not the others." "That's by design," Carlos confirms. "The structure compartmentalizes information so that knowledge of one component doesn't reveal the entire system." He turns to her with genuine professional admiration. "Which makes your documentation all the more remarkable. You've captured evidence from multiple points in the cascade, allowing us to reconstruct the entire mechanism." What's our strongest evidence of fraudulent intent? Linda asks, focusing on practical application. Carlos highlights several transaction pathways in red. These movements directly contradict statements made in your joint tax filings. Mr. Miller certified under penalty of perjury that certain assets were allocated for specific purposes, while simultaneously transferring them into these hidden structures. He shifts to another section of the diagram. More immediately relevant to your current situation is this sequence initiated 3 months ago. Assets were systematically moved from joint accounts through this layered structure, ultimately consolidating in preparation for the property transfer to Ms. Morgan. Kelly winces slightly at this reference to her role in the deception, though she understands its strategic necessity. The property transfer itself, Carlos continues, represents the culmination of this preparatory sequence. By transferring the estate for nominal consideration, $1, to a seemingly unrelated third party, Mr. Miller attempted to remove the most significant physical asset from potential division, while maintaining effective control through Ms. Morgan. If I hadn't discovered the affair in the Eclipse documents, Lois asks, how would this have played out legally? Carlos exchanges glances with Molly before responding. In many similar cases, the complexity creates sufficient confusion and delay to force an inequitable settlement. By the time the courts untangle such structures, assets have often been further obscured or diminished. Most spouses lack the resources for prolonged forensic investigation. But we're not in that situation, Molly interjects confidently. Your documentation provides the roadmap we need to move quickly and decisively. Carlos nods in agreement. Precisely. Instead of spending months reconstructing the financial trail, we can proceed immediately to enforcement actions based on documented violations. He turns to a new slide showing a strategic timeline. I recommend a 3-phase approach. First, secure emergency injunctions freezing all identified assets within these structures. Second, file formal documentation with tax and regulatory authorities, highlighting specific discrepancies. Third, prepare expert testimony demonstrating the comprehensive nature of the financial manipulation. The methodical approach mirrors Lois's own documentation process, systematic, thorough, leaving nothing to chance. As Carlos elaborates on technical details, she finds unexpected comfort in the translation of personal betrayal into professional challenge, emotional injury into actionable strategy. There's something else you should know, Carlos adds, his expression growing more serious. In reviewing these transactions, I've identified patterns consistent with potential tax evasion, not merely asset concealment for divorce purposes. This revelation shifts the atmosphere in the room, expanding implications beyond marital dissolution into potential criminal liability. Are you certain? Lois asks, the implications significant for both their strategy and Jim's vulnerability. The indicators are strong enough that I'd be professionally obligated to flag them in any official capacity, Carlos confirms. Specifically, the movement of assets through these 3 entities mirrors patterns typically used to create artificial losses for tax offsets while maintaining effective control of the underlying assets. Molly leans forward, immediately grasping the strategic implications. This changes our leverage considerably. Jim likely assumes we're focused exclusively on the marital assets and prenuptial enforcement. He won't anticipate exposure of the broader financial structure, Carlos agrees. In my experience, individuals engaging in this level of financial manipulation compartmentalize their thinking. Divorce strategy separate from tax strategy, both separate from business operations. Creating comprehensive vulnerability when all 3 are exposed simultaneously, Molly concludes. Lois absorbs this new dimension of their strategy. The potential legal consequences for Jim extend far beyond losing assets he attempted to hide, into professional reputation, regulatory scrutiny, and possibly criminal exposure. The stakes have escalated beyond anything she initially envisioned when discovering the affair. I'm not interested in punitive action for its own sake, she says carefully. My goal remains restoration and recognition of my contributions to our shared assets. Carlos nods understanding. This additional leverage doesn't commit you to any particular course of action. It simply strengthens your negotiating position and creates multiple pathways toward resolution. Speaking of resolution, Tanner interjects, checking his secure tablet, we have confirmation that Jim and Kelly checked into the Pebble Beach Resort an hour ago. They've reserved the presidential suite for 3 nights, charged to Jim's private Centurion card rather than any business account. Kelly shakes her head at this information. He truly believes he's untouchable, that no one will connect the dots. A common assumption among individuals accustomed to controlling narratives, Carlos observes. Financial manipulators often develop a sense of invulnerability proportional to their success in previous deceptions. Molly turns to Lois, the decision point now clear. With Carlos's analysis complete and Jim's current location confirmed, we need to determine our immediate next step. The property transfer gives us grounds for emergency court intervention. Do we proceed immediately or continue building our comprehensive case? The question highlights the strategic crossroads they've reached, between immediate tactical response and broader strategic positioning. Each option carries different implications for timing, public exposure, and ultimate outcome. Lois considers the documented evidence spread across the conference table, the financial web displayed on the wall screen, the team of experts assembled, to convert her meticulous documentation into effective action. For the first time since discovering Jim's betrayal, she feels the full weight of restored agency, the power to make consequential decisions based on complete information rather than manipulated half-truths. Let's move forward with the emergency petition, she decides, her voice steady with conviction. Not just based on the property transfer, but with enough documentation of the broader financial structure to establish the pattern of deception. Carlos nods approval. Strategically sound, revealing enough to secure immediate court action without exposing our complete understanding of his financial architecture. I'll file first thing tomorrow morning, Molly confirms. We should anticipate initial court appearance within 48 hours. As the team transitions to preparing specific documents for this filing, Lois experiences a moment of clarity amidst the technical discussions. The alliance she's formed, not just with legal and financial experts, but with her own capacity for strategic thinking, has fundamentally altered the trajectory Jim established. The narrative he carefully constructed over years is unraveling, not through emotional confrontation, but through methodical counter-strategy. There's one more thing we should discuss, Lois says as the initial preparations conclude. When Jim receives notice of the emergency petition, his first call won't be to his regular attorney. It will be to Mike Reynolds. The name registers immediately with both Molly and Carlos, a divorce attorney infamous for scorched earth tactics and personal attacks on opposing spouses. You're right, Molly acknowledges, and Reynolds has a standard playbook for cases like this: immediate counter-allegations, character assassination, claims of mental instability or financial incompetence. We should prepare for that response, Lois says with remarkable composure. Not just legally, but personally. I need to be ready for what comes next. The strategic alliance they've formed extends beyond technical expertise to include emotional preparation, anticipating not just legal maneuvers but personal attacks designed to undermine Lois's resolve and public standing. This dimension of their strategy, though less tangible than financial analysis or legal filings, may prove equally crucial to sustaining their momentum through the challenges ahead. As the afternoon sunlight fades into evening, the team continues. Their preparations, documents organized, statements prepared, contingencies mapped. The alliance formed in this conference room represents more than professional expertise. It embodies the reclamation of narrative control, the restoration of agency through strategic collaboration. For Lois, watching these skilled professionals convert her painstaking documentation into actionable strategy confirms what she's gradually come to understand. No individual, however controlled or isolated, is truly powerless when armed with truth and determination. The alliance she's built stands ready not just to challenge Jim's deception, but to rewrite the story he thought was his alone to author. Dawn breaks over Molly's guest house as Lois awakens to the soft chime of her secure phone. A message from Tanner confirms that overnight monitoring of Jim's activities shows nothing unexpected. Still at Pebble Beach, still unaware of the counteroffensive about to unfold. She allows herself 5 minutes of quiet reflection before the day's intensive preparation begins, centering herself for what lies ahead. By 7:30, the team has reassembled in Molly's conference room, now transformed into an operational command center. Multiple screens display different aspects of their strategy: legal documents, financial analyses, communication protocols, contingency plans. The atmosphere is focused, purposeful, each person clear on their role in the day's objectives. The emergency petition is ready for filing, Molly announces, distributing final copies for review. We'll submit electronically at 9, which should trigger initial hearing scheduling by early afternoon. Security protocols are in place, Tanner adds, his technical expertise essential to protecting their communications. All team members have secure devices configured with multiple authentication layers. Communications about case specifics should route exclusively through these encrypted channels. Linda outlines the financial documentation prepared for both court submission and regulatory consideration. We've organized evidence in 3 tiers. First tier establishes the property transfer as fraudulent, sufficient for immediate court action. Second tier demonstrates the broader pattern of financial manipulation. Third tier documents potential regulatory violations, held in reserve for strategic deployment. This layered approach reflects their broader strategy, revealing enough to secure immediate intervention while maintaining strategic reserves for subsequent phases. Like a chess player thinking several moves ahead, the team has mapped potential responses and counter-responses, preparing for multiple contingencies. What about public narrative management? Lois asks, demonstrating her understanding of a dimension Jim has always controlled effectively. Already structured, Kelly confirms, her background in corporate communications proving valuable beyond her initial role. We've prepared 3 levels of statements for different audiences: legal, professional, and personal circles. Each emphasizes factual documentation while avoiding emotional framing that could be weaponized. This attention to narrative control represents a direct counter to Jim's narrative management section in his Eclipse documents, anticipating and neutralizing his attempts to control public perception through strategic transparency rather than emotional disclosure. Have we considered potential interference with evidence? Lois asks, her months of documenting Jim's deception making her acutely aware of his capacity for manipulation. Carlos nods appreciation for the question. All financial documentation exists in multiple secured locations, authenticated with blockchain verification. No single access point can compromise the evidence chain. Same for communications and legal documentation, Tanner adds. We're using distributed storage with multi-factor authentication. Even if Jim somehow accessed one repository, redundant systems would preserve everything. This comprehensive preparation extends beyond documentation to personal security measures. Molly outlines protocols for Lois's movements over the coming days, ensuring she remains insulated from potential intimidation or manipulation attempts while maintaining access to needed resources. Once the petition is filed, we should anticipate escalation within hours, Molly explains. Based on previous cases involving Mike Reynolds, we can expect immediate attempts at both legal maneuvering and personal pressure points. I'm ready, Lois affirms, her composure reflecting months of psychological preparation. The woman Jim expects to collapse under pressure has been systematically building resilience alongside her legal case, transforming vulnerability into strategic strength. The preparation extends to specific scenarios they might encounter. Linda guides the team through potential financial countermoves Jim might attempt when served with the emergency petition, transfers to unknown accounts, claims of business, necessity, sudden liquidation of traceable assets. For each possibility, they've developed specific responses, converting reactive defense into proactive anticipation. What about the estate itself? Lois asks, thinking through practical considerations. Once the emergency petition freezes the property transfer, what happens to physical access and control? The court will likely establish a temporary preservation order, Molly explains, effectively freezing the status quo until preliminary hearings determine interim arrangements. No one can be removed, and no significant alterations can occur without court approval. This reassurance addresses immediate practical concerns while highlighting the significance of timing. Filing before Jim returns from his weekend away provides tactical advantage in establishing this preservation status. As the clock approaches 9, the team conducts final reviews of all documents. Molly stands ready at her computer to execute the electronic filing that will transform months of preparation into formal legal action. The atmosphere tenses with anticipation of crossing this threshold from private strategy to public engagement. Once I submit this filing, there's no going back, Molly says, meeting Lois's eyes directly. We're committing to the strategy we've developed. Are you certain this is how you want to proceed? The question acknowledges the magnitude of the step they're about to take, moving from documentation to direct confrontation, from private knowledge to public declaration. Despite the comprehensive preparation, this moment requires personal conviction beyond strategic calculation. Lois takes a deep breath, surveying the room of allies who have helped transform her isolation into connection, her vulnerability into strength, her reactive position into strategic initiative. I'm certain, she confirms with quiet resolve. File the petition. With a decisive click, Molly submits the documentation that will irrevocably alter the trajectory Jim has so carefully established. Within moments, confirmation appears. The petition has been received and assigned to Judge Harriman's court, with preliminary hearing scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The strategic preparation phase has culminated in this decisive action, transforming months of documentation and planning into formal legal proceedings that will soon force Jim to confront the consequences of his calculated deception. The pieces are in motion, the strategy deployed, the response now inevitable. The team works through the morning following the petition filing, each focused on their respective responsibilities. Shortly before noon, Linda interrupts with unexpected news. "I found something," she announces, her expression a mixture of professional excitement and personal concern. While cross-referencing financial records, I discovered communications between Jim and Arthur Bennett. Lois looks up sharply. Arthur Bennett? My former colleague from the Harbor Coalition? Linda nods, turning her laptop to display a series of emails dated approximately 8 months earlier. These were in the backup files from Jim's secondary email server. Apparently, Bennett has been providing Jim with regular updates about the coalition's activities for years. Molly moves closer to examine the evidence. This goes beyond casual information sharing. These are detailed reports on your former colleagues, their positions, their vulnerabilities. The revelation lands with particular weight. Arthur Bennett had been Lois's closest professional ally before her departure from the coalition, the person who had most strongly encouraged her professional development, who had seemed most disappointed by her decision to leave. Bennett was my mentor, Lois says quietly, the betrayal adding a new dimension to her understanding. I trusted him completely. Tanner quickly accesses additional files. The relationship appears to have begun shortly after you and Jim met. Regular payments, from one of Jim's shell companies to a consulting entity owned by Bennett. This discovery recontextualizes not just Lois's professional history, but the genesis of her relationship with Jim. What she had experienced as a chance meeting at the charity gala now appears as a calculated introduction, potentially orchestrated, through Bennett's inside knowledge of her schedule and interests. He knew exactly how to approach me. Lois realizes, pieces clicking into place. The specific questions about sustainable development, the interest in community integration, those weren't spontaneous. He'd been briefed. Kelly's expression shows genuine shock. He researched you like a corporate acquisition target. Not just researched, Molly corrects, examining additional documents Tanner has located. According to these communications, Bennett provided regular insights throughout your relationship, warning Jim when you expressed professional restlessness, suggesting ways to redirect your energies away from career advancement. Carlos identifies the financial dimension. The consulting payments increased significantly around key decision points in your relationship, your engagement, your departure from the coalition, the estate purchase. This revelation transforms Lois's understanding of her marriage's origins. What she had experienced as organic connection now appears as strategic manipulation from the very beginning. Jim's apparent shared values and interests carefully crafted to appeal to her specific priorities and aspirations. This changes everything, Lois says, absorbing the implications. And nothing. The paradox captures her response perfectly. This new information fundamentally alters her understanding of the past, while simultaneously reinforcing the pattern of deception they've been documenting. The scope of Jim's manipulation extends further back and involves more participants than she had realized, yet follows the same fundamental strategy of control through calculated intervention. We need to incorporate this into our presentation for tomorrow's hearing, Molly decides, recognizing both the emotional and strategic significance. It establishes a pattern of deceptive behavior extending to the very foundation of the relationship. As the team integrates this revelation into their broader strategy, Lois experiences an unexpected sense of clarity rather than devastation. The discovery completes her understanding of the comprehensive nature of Jim's deception, removing any lingering doubts or nostalgia for what she once believed their relationship represented. Bennett wasn't the only one, was he? She asks, intuiting the broader implications. Tanner's continued investigation confirms her suspicion. We're finding similar patterns with at least 3 other individuals in your former professional and social circles, people strategically positioned to monitor and influence your decisions while appearing to be independent connections. This network of paid informants explains patterns that had previously seemed merely unfortunate, how certain friendships had cooled without clear cause, how professional opportunities had mysteriously failed to materialize, how her social circle had gradually constricted to individuals connected to Jim. Far from undermining their strategy, this revelation strengthens it, establishing Jim's pattern of manipulation as systematic rather than situational, fundamental rather than reactive. The discovery provides critical context for understanding the property transfer not as an isolated act of betrayal, but as the culmination of a comprehensive strategy of control initiated from the very beginning of their relationship. The conference room transforms as the team integrates the new information about Arthur Bennett and other paid informants into their strategy. Molly stands at a whiteboard, mapping the expanded scope of Jim's manipulation, while the others contribute specialized insights from their respective areas of expertise. We need to restructure our approach for maximum strategic advantage, Molly explains, dividing the whiteboard into distinct sections. The hearing tomorrow is just the first engagement in what will likely become a multi-phase campaign. She draws a timeline across the top of the board, marking critical decision points and anticipated responses. Judge Harriman will focus primarily on the property transfer tomorrow, whether to grant the emergency freeze and preservation order. We need to present enough evidence to secure that immediate protection without revealing our complete understanding of Jim's network. Carlos approaches the board, adding financial notations at key points. I recommend a 3-tiered evidence strategy. First tier focuses exclusively on the fraudulent property transfer. Clear, unambiguous documentation that gives the judge straightforward grounds for immediate action. Second tier establishes the broader pattern of financial manipulation, Linda continues, seamlessly building on Carlos's framework. Ready for deployment when Reynolds attempts to characterize the property transfer as an isolated transaction or legitimate business arrangement. And the third tier? Lois asks, recognizing the strategic sequencing. Third tier reveals the comprehensive network of manipulation. Bennett, the other informants, the systematic isolation mechanisms, Molly explains. We hold this in reserve for deployment only if Reynolds attempts character assassination or claims of your financial incompetence. This layered approach mirrors military strategy, revealing capabilities only as needed, preserving strategic advantage through controlled disclosure. Each potential counter-move by Jim's team has been anticipated, with specific responses prepared and evidence packaged for maximum impact. Tanner adds the digital dimension to their planning. I've established automated monitoring of Jim's primary communication channels. We'll have near real-time notification of significant moves, allowing us to adjust tactics accordingly. Kelly, drawing on her understanding of Jim's thought patterns, outlines the most likely immediate responses. He'll attempt to characterize the property transfer as a legitimate transaction with business justification. When that fails, he'll shift to portraying Lois as financially naive and emotionally unstable, suggesting the legal action stems from personal vindictiveness rather than legitimate grievance. Classic Darvo, Molly observes, using the acronym for Deny, Attack, Reverse Victim and Offender, a common tactic in high-conflict divorces. We've prepared specific counter-documentation for each element of that strategy. The comprehensive planning extends beyond tomorrow's hearing to map the entire anticipated sequence, from initial legal engagement through potential settlement negotiation or trial preparation. Each team member contributes specialized expertise to a strategy that addresses not just legal and financial dimensions, but psychological and narrative elements as well. As the strategy takes comprehensive form on Molly's whiteboard, Lois recognizes the stark contrast between this collaborative approach and the isolation that characterized her marriage. Where Jim had systematically restricted her access to information and support, this team actively integrates diverse perspectives and expertise. The strategy they're developing reflects not just professional competence, but a fundamentally different approach to problem solving, open rather than concealed, collaborative rather than controlling. What's my role tomorrow? Lois asks, focusing on practical preparation. Presence, composure, and selective testimony, Molly responds. Your demeanor is as important as the evidence we present. Reynolds will attempt to provoke emotional responses that conform to the narrative of irrationality he'll try to establish. The final hour of strategy formation focuses on preparing Lois for this critical performance, not manufacturing false presentation, but helping her maintain authentic composure under deliberate provocation. The team conducts simulated questioning, anticipating the tactics Reynolds will likely employ, and practicing measured responses that convey both emotional truth and strategic discipline. As evening approaches, the comprehensive strategy stands, complete. A multi-layered approach addressing legal, financial, psychological, and narrative dimensions of the conflict. The whiteboard displays not just a plan for tomorrow's hearing, but a roadmap for navigating the entire process of reclaiming Lois's rightful position and resources. We're as prepared as we can be, Molly concludes, surveying the detailed strategy they've developed. Now, we rest and prepare for execution. The presidential suite at Pebble Beach Resort exudes understated luxury, panoramic ocean views, custom furnishings, and the particular atmosphere that comes only with spaces designed for those accustomed to the finest things. Jim stands at the floor-to-ceiling windows, tumbler of 30-year scotch in hand, watching waves crash against the iconic coastline as the sun begins its descent toward the horizon. To successful transitions, he says, raising his glass toward Kelly, who reclines on the designer sofa, her own drink untouched. Her smile is practiced, perfect, revealing nothing of her true thoughts or divided loyalties. Everything proceeding according to plan? She asks, maintaining the role she's played flawlessly for months. Jim's satisfaction is palpable as he turns. From the view. Better than anticipated. The property transfer executed perfectly, legally binding and essentially irreversible. Lois departed exactly as predicted, emotional, unstrategic, retreating rather than confronting. He moves to the suite's elegant desk where his laptop displays a series of notifications. Security alerts from the estate showing Lois's departure with a small suitcase, confirmation of the property transfer recording with the county assessor's office, messages from his financial team confirming completion of key asset movements. The timing couldn't be better, he continues, scrolling through these digital confirmations of his triumph. The Westridge merger announces next week, which will provide the perfect professional cover for the personal separation. Regrettable, but necessary focus on corporate responsibilities during this transformative period. Kelly notes how he quotes from what is clearly a prepared statement, evidence of the comprehensive narrative management outlined in the Eclipse documents. Every element of the unfolding situation has been scripted, each potential variable accounted for in his strategic planning. And the board meeting? She prompts, gathering information while maintaining her facade of supportive interest. Scheduled for Thursday. The governance committee has already indicated support for my expanded role post-merger. His satisfaction deepens as he adds, appropriate timing for the new chapter professionally and personally. Jim refreshes his drink. The confident movements of a man who believes himself in complete control of his circumstances. He's arranged all elements precisely: financial, legal, professional, personal. Each component of his life reconfigured according to his exclusive preferences, without regard for commitments or consequences to others. Mike Reynolds confirmed. Our meeting for Monday morning, he adds, referring to the notoriously aggressive divorce attorney. By then, Lois will have had sufficient time to process the initial shock. Her emotional state should make her particularly susceptible to accepting an expedited settlement. The calculated coldness of this assessment, timing his legal maneuvers to exploit his wife's presumed emotional vulnerability, reveals the true nature of his approach. Not merely separation, but psychological and financial domination, orchestrated. For maximum advantage regardless of the human cost. You don't think she'll fight? Kelly asks, carefully balancing curiosity against suspicion. Jim laughs, the sound entirely without warmth. Fight? With what resources? What knowledge? What support system? His confidence borders on contempt as he continues. I've systematically ensured she has none of the three. The accounts she knows about contain enough for modest living expenses, and nothing more. The professionals she might turn to are either directly connected to me or have been systematically removed from her circle. The friends who might provide emotional support have been strategically distanced over years. He returns to the window, surveying the manicured grounds of the resort with the same proprietary satisfaction evident in his discussion of the separation. No, she won't fight. She'll accept whatever settlement Reynolds frames as generous while actually representing the bare minimum legally required. The suite's phone chimes with an incoming call, Jim's executive assistant confirming final arrangements for next week's merger announcement. The conversation reveals another dimension of his apparent triumph, professional ascension paralleling his personal extraction, both executed with the same calculating precision. As he concludes the call, Jim's expression reflects complete satisfaction. A man at the pinnacle of success by his own definition, every element aligned to his exclusive advantage. The empire he's constructed, financial, professional, personal, stands seemingly unassailable, testament to his strategic brilliance and unfettered ambition. To new beginnings, he proposes, raising his glass again, entirely unaware that at this very moment, Molly is completing the emergency petition filing that will fundamentally disrupt the victory he believes complete. Kelly returns the toast, her expression revealing nothing of what she knows, that the man standing before her, In his moment of apparent triumph has already set in motion his own inevitable downfall. His confidence, bordering on arrogance, has prevented him from considering the possibility that Lois possesses precisely the resources, knowledge, and support system he believes he has denied her. In this moment of perceived victory, Jim Miller stands utterly unaware of the comprehensive counter-strategy about to upend everything he believes secure, a perfect embodiment of the ancient wisdom that pride precedes the fall. The following morning brings a clear, crisp dawn to the city. In Judge Harriman's chambers, Molly stands with the emergency petition and supporting documentation organized in precise folders. The judge, known for both efficiency and meticulous attention to detail, reviews the materials with practiced focus, occasionally making notes in the margins. "These allegations are substantial, Counselor," Judge Harriman observes, looking up from the property transfer documentation. "You're seeking an immediate freeze on all transactions related to the Miller estate and associated holdings?" "Yes, Your Honor," Molly confirms. The facts demonstrate clear intent to fraudulently transfer marital assets immediately prior to anticipated divorce proceedings. The $1 consideration for a property valued at $12 million alone constitutes prima facie evidence of fraudulent conveyance. Judge Harriman reviews the prenuptial agreement with particular attention to the infidelity clause that forms a cornerstone of their legal position. "This provision is unusually specific in its consequences," she notes, "and executed with full legal counsel for both parties," Molly adds. "Mr. Miller's subsequent actions represent deliberate attempts to circumvent this binding agreement." After 30 minutes of thorough examination, Judge Harriman reaches her decision. "I find sufficient evidence to grant the emergency petition. I'm issuing an immediate freeze on the property transfer and all associated financial transactions pending preliminary hearing." She signs the order with decisive strokes. "Hearing scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow. All parties are required to attend." This judicial action, the first official acknowledgement of Lois's counter-strategy, transforms private preparation into public proceeding. The strategic initiative has been formally activated, legal machinery now in motion that cannot be easily stopped or diverted. Back at Molly's office, the team receives confirmation of the judge's order with restrained satisfaction. This initial victory, while significant, represents merely the first move in the complex engagement ahead. Process servers are en route to Pebble Beach with the order and hearing notification, Tanner reports, monitoring the digital confirmation. System. Estimated delivery within the hour. Lois absorbs this information with composed determination rather than vindictive pleasure. The formal activation of their strategy brings both validation and intensified pressure, moving from preparation to execution, from theoretical planning to immediate consequences. "Jim's reaction will be our first indication of Reynolds' likely approach," Molly explains, already anticipating the next phase. "The initial shock will give way to strategic response, probably within hours." As if confirming her prediction, Tanner's monitoring system registers a flurry of activity, Jim's personal phone activating multiple calls in rapid succession following receipt of the court documents, culminating in a 20-minute conversation with Mike Reynolds. Digital surveillance confirms Reynolds has accessed the case filing system, Tanner reports. He's reviewing the petition and supporting documentation now. This real-time intelligence provides crucial insight into their opponent's awareness and response timeline. The team watches various monitoring systems as Jim activates his counter-response, calls to financial advisors, digital access to secure accounts, attempts to initiate transactions immediately frozen by the court order. He's testing the boundaries of the freeze, Carlos observes, noting the pattern of attempted financial movements, confirming which assets are restricted and which remain accessible. By mid-afternoon, the anticipated escalation occurs. Reynolds files an emergency motion to dissolve the asset freeze, claiming excessive and unwarranted restrictions on legitimate business operations unrelated to marital assets. Molly reviews, this filing with professional assessment rather than concern. Standard opening move. Judge Harriman anticipated this response. It's addressed specifically in her order requiring full financial disclosure before considering any modification to the freeze. The activation phase continues with precision timing as Kelly initiates her planned departure from Pebble Beach, creating the appearance of distance from Jim while maintaining her role in their information network. Her secure communication confirms Jim's increasingly agitated state as he comprehends the comprehensive nature of the legal challenge now confronting him. He's still underestimating the situation, Kelly reports during her encrypted call with the team. He believes this is a standard divorce maneuver that Reynolds can easily counter, not recognition of the full eclipse strategy. This misapprehension, believing the challenge targets only the property transfer rather than his entire financial manipulation network, represents a critical strategic advantage. Jim continues operating on the assumption that Lois possesses limited information and resources, unaware of the comprehensive documentation and expertise now arrayed against him. As evening approaches, the activation phase completes its initial cycle. The court order is fully implemented, legal responses, and counter-responses filed, and initial positions established. The mechanism meticulously constructed over months of preparation now operates independently. Institutional and judicial systems engaged in processing the evidence and arguments presented. Lois reviews the day's developments with her team, the strategic initiative now irreversibly activated. What began as private documentation has transformed into public proceedings, personal betrayal into legal consequence, individual vulnerability into collective action. Tomorrow, Molly concludes as they finalize preparation for the preliminary hearing. We move from activation to direct confrontation. Are you ready? Lois nods with quiet certainty, fully prepared for the face-to-face engagement that will test not just their legal strategy, but her personal resolve in the crucible of direct confrontation with the man who believed her incapable of meaningful resistance. I've been ready for months, she responds, the activation of their strategy bringing not anxiety, but resolute determination to see the process through to its justified conclusion. The courthouse stands as a monument to order and procedure, classical, architecture housing the systematic application of justice. Lois arrives with Molly and Carlos, their professional demeanor contrasting with the emotional weight of the proceedings ahead. The media presence is minimal, exactly as planned, with no leaked information to attract attention to this preliminary hearing. Inside courtroom 3B, Judge Harriman's domain is arranged with meticulous precision. The polished wood, formal seating, and hierarchical design all reinforce the authority of legal process over individual impulse, a fitting environment for confronting manipulation with accountability. Lois takes her seat at the plaintiff's table, arranging her materials with deliberate calm. When the side door opens and Jim enters with Mike Reynolds, she maintains her composure despite the electricity of this first direct contact since the property transfer. Jim's expression shifts momentarily upon seeing her, surprise at her collected appearance quickly masked by practiced confidence as he confers with Reynolds. All rise, the bailiff announces as Judge Harriman enters, her reputation for no-nonsense efficiency immediately apparent in her brisk acknowledgement of the assembled parties before addressing the matter at hand. We're here regarding petition number 2024 CV 8734, emergency asset freeze in the matter of Miller vs. Miller, she states, reviewing the documentation before her. I've examined the filings from both parties. Before hearing arguments, I want to establish factual foundation regarding the property transfer at issue. She turns her direct attention to Jim. Mr. Miller, court records indicate you transferred the family residence at 247 Lakeside Drive to Ms. Kelly Morgan for $1 consideration. Is that correct? Jim rises, his custom suit and confident posture projecting the executive presence that has served him well in boardrooms. Yes, Your Honor, but context is essential for understanding. Simple confirmation is sufficient at this stage, Judge Harriman interrupts, unwilling to allow narrative manipulation. Ms. Morgan is present? Kelly stands from her position in the public seating. Yes, Your Honor. And you accepted this property transfer? I signed the documents presented by Mr. Miller, yes, Kelly confirms carefully. Judge Harriman turns to Lois. Mrs. Miller, when did you become aware of this transaction? The morning it occurred, Your Honor. I witnessed my husband loading his belongings into Ms. Morgan's vehicle after informing me the property had been transferred, and I would need to vacate within 30 days. This simple factual statement, delivered, without emotional embellishment, establishes the human reality behind the legal documentation. Judge Harriman notes Lois's composure, a sharp contrast to the emotional instability Reynolds has already suggested in his filings. Mr. Reynolds, you've moved to dissolve the emergency freeze, arguing it unnecessarily restricts legitimate business operations. Please elaborate. Reynolds rises with the practiced performance of a man accustomed to aggressive litigation. His reputation for intimidation tactics precedes him, but Judge Harriman's courtroom provides little space for such maneuvers. Your Honor, my client's financial structures involve complex business operations entirely separate from marital assets. This overly broad freeze effectively paralyzes legitimate enterprises employing hundreds of people based on a vindictive mischaracterization of a simple property arrangement. Ms. Marcus, your response? Molly stands, her presentation methodical rather than theatrical. The documentation submitted clearly establishes that the property transfer represents not an isolated transaction, but the culmination of a comprehensive strategy to remove marital assets from equitable distribution. She presents the first-tier evidence, financial records showing the property's inclusion in joint tax filings, documentation of improvements funded through marital accounts, and most significantly, the prenuptial agreement with its explicit infidelity clause. Furthermore, she continues, evidence demonstrates Mr. Miller's relationship with Ms. Morgan constitutes precisely the infidelity addressed in the contractual agreement both parties executed with full legal representation. This direct reference to the affair, presented as contractual violation rather than emotional grievance, shifts the atmosphere in the courtroom. Jim's expression tightens as he whispers urgently to Reynolds, who attempts to redirect. Your Honor, unsupported allegations of personal conduct have no bearing on legitimate asset management decisions. Judge Harriman examines the evidence with careful attention. The prenuptial agreement specifically addresses consequences for infidelity by either party. The court cannot simply ignore this contractual provision. As Reynolds attempts to minimize the agreement's relevance, Molly introduces the second tier of evidence, documentation showing the systematic financial restructuring preceding the property transfer. Carlos provides expert testimony explaining the pattern of asset movement designed to circumvent equitable distribution. The confrontation escalates as Reynolds, recognizing the strength of the financial evidence, pivots to personal attack, exactly as anticipated in their strategy planning. Your Honor, Mrs. Miller has demonstrated persistent confusion regarding financial matters throughout the marriage. My client has simply been protecting family assets from mismanagement while attempting to provide generous support despite their marital difficulties. This attack, suggesting Lois's incompetence rather than Jim's deception, triggers deployment of their third evidence tier. Molly presents documentation of Lois's professional qualifications, her role in substantial financial decisions throughout the marriage, and critically, evidence of Jim's systematic efforts to isolate her from independent financial control. Throughout this escalating confrontation, Lois maintains composed focus, her demeanor directly contradicting Reynolds' characterization of emotional instability. When Judge Harriman invites her direct testimony, she speaks with clear precision, addressing factual matters without vindictive commentary. The culminating moment comes when Molly introduces evidence of Jim's relationship with Arthur Bennett, documentation showing long-term payment for monitoring and manipulating Lois's professional opportunities. This revelation visibly impacts Jim, who had believed this arrangement completely concealed. Judge Harriman reviews all evidence with methodical thoroughness before delivering her ruling, maintaining the asset freeze pending comprehensive financial disclosure, ordering preservation of all documentation, and scheduling further proceedings with explicit warning against any attempts to circumvent the court's restrictions. As the formal confrontation concludes, Lois and Jim make momentary eye contact across the courtroom, his expression a mixture of shock and calculation as he comprehends, perhaps for the first time, that he faces not an emotional adversary, but a strategic opponent who has documented his manipulation and activated systematic accountability. The direct confrontation has accomplished its purpose, not merely maintaining the emergency protections, but establishing the credibility of Lois's position, the validity of her evidence, and the legitimacy of her claim to equitable treatment. What Jim designed as a unilateral exercise of power has transformed into balanced legal proceeding, his presumed advantages neutralized by preparation and documentation. As they exit the courtroom, Molly confirms the successful execution of their strategy's confrontation phase. Every element proceeded as anticipated. Reynolds deployed exactly the tactics we prepared for, and Judge Harriman's ruling gives us everything we needed at this stage. For Lois, the direct confrontation represents more than legal advantage. It marks the reclamation of presence and voice in a relationship where both had been systematically diminished. Standing her ground with composure and evidence rather than reactive emotion constitutes not just strategic effectiveness, but personal restoration. 6 months have passed since the preliminary hearing. The courthouse steps, once the site of tense confrontation, now serve as the backdrop for formal resolution. Lois exits the building alongside Molly, Carlos, and the core team that supported her journey from isolated vulnerability to empowered resolution. "Congratulations," Molly says, her professional demeanor softening with genuine warmth. "The settlement agreement is everything we aimed for and more." The legal proceedings that began with the emergency petition have concluded with comprehensive resolution, not through prolonged courtroom battle, but through strategic negotiation from a position of documented strength. The settlement agreement Lois carries represents not just financial equity, but narrative restoration. "I never expected Jim to agree to the public acknowledgement clause," Linda remarks as they descend the steps. "He had no viable alternative," Carlos explains. "The financial evidence was irrefutable, and the potential tax implications gave us leverage beyond the divorce proceedings themselves." The settlement includes not just equitable division of assets, but formal recognition of Lois's contributions to their joint holdings, restoration of professional connections systematically severed during the marriage, and public correction of misattributions Jim had established in their social and business circles. "The foundation provisions matter most to me," Lois says, referring to the agreement's establishment of a harbor development fund under her direction, restoring her professional identity while creating community benefit from the resolution of private injustice. As they reach the plaza, Tanner confirms the final digital transfers have completed, access restored to accounts systematically removed from Lois's control, documentation secured in permanent repositories, monitoring systems, ensuring compliance with all settlement provisions. The resolution extends beyond legal and financial dimensions to personal reclamation. During the months of proceedings, Lois has systematically rebuilt connections severed during her marriage, re-establishing friendship with her cousin Maria, reconnecting with former colleagues, creating new relationships based on authentic exchange, rather than strategic calculation. The estate, central to the initial conflict, has been sold by mutual agreement, the proceeds divided according to the settlement terms. Lois has purchased a riverside apartment in the city center, walking distance, from the Harbor Coalition where she now serves as special advisor. The space reflects her reclaimed aesthetic and priorities. Open rather than isolated, connected to community rather than removed from it. "What about Kelly?" Lois asks as they prepare to separate, each returning to their respective professional responsibilities. "Starting her MBA program next week," Molly confirms. "The recommendation letters from you and Carlos open doors at 3 top programs. This resolution for Kelly, transformation from apparent adversary to acknowledged ally, represents another dimension of the new equilibrium. Her role in documenting Jim's deception, initially undertaken at Molly's request, evolved into genuine commitment to ethical practice in business contexts. The most profound aspect of resolution remains largely invisible to outside observers: Lois's internal reclamation of narrative agency. Through methodical documentation of manipulation, strategic response to deception, and composed perseverance through confrontation, she has rewritten not just legal outcome, but personal understanding. The foundation launch is scheduled for next month, she tells the team as they prepare to depart. "I hope you'll all attend." This invitation, extending professional connection into personal context, marks another element of the new equilibrium. Where Jim had systematically separated Lois's personal and professional domains to maintain control, she now integrates them deliberately, creating congruence between public contribution and private values. As the team disperses, Lois takes a moment alone on the courthouse plaza. The journey from discovering Jim's betrayal to establishing this resolution has transformed not just her circumstances, but her understanding of agency. The systematic documentation that began as self-protection became the foundation for comprehensive restoration of assets, identity, and narrative control. The new equilibrium established through strategic response to manipulation extends beyond personal circumstances to professional contribution. Lois's experience has informed new protocols at the Harbor Coalition for ensuring balanced voice in development decisions, creating institutional protection against the isolation and silencing she experienced individually. Later that afternoon, in her new apartment overlooking the harbor she once helped revitalize, Lois reviews the foundation charter with focused attention. The organization, dedicated to supporting women's economic independence through professional development and financial education, represents her most significant response to the manipulation she experienced, transforming personal injustice into systemic improvement. As sunset colors the harbor waters, Lois acknowledges both the journey completed and the path ahead. The resolution of conflict with Jim marks not an ending, but a transition. From recovery to creation, from response to initiation. The equilibrium established through strategic persistence provides not just stability, but foundation for authentic contribution aligned with her reclaimed values and voice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.